Today, the History of the Papacy is brought to you in part by Sudio Premium Headphones and Earbuds. Sudio offers 5 distinct and high-quality styles. Each has incredibly long battery life, which is really key when you're outside all day doing hard work and your Bluetooth earbuds die. Doesn't it always happen right in the middle of the best part of the show? Ridiculous. You shouldn't have to go through that. The same thing if you're listening on a long commute. It's just barbaric. These headphones and earbuds have excellent audio quality with sleek and sophisticated Scandinavian design as well. But, at least with the headphones, you don't have to follow a long set of directions to put them together. All you have to do to start listening to all your favorite podcasts and music on your new Sudio Headphones is to go to their website, sudiosweden.com, and enter discount code POPE at checkout to receive a 15% discount and free worldwide shipping. That's a 15% discount and shipping to anywhere in the world for free. Again, go over to sudiosweden.com and enter the discount code POPE. Enjoy your next episode of the History of the Papacy and Beyond the Big Screen with your new pair of Sudio headphones. More information can also be found in the show notes. Sidetrack episode 59, live from Wittenberg with Travis Dow. Today we have a very special episode where we will continue to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. We have the Agora Podcast Network foreign correspondent Travis Dow reporting for us in Wittenberg, Germany. Travis is, of course, a friend of the show and longtime collaborator. He is the host of many podcasts, including the History of Germany, both in English and German, The Secret Cabinet, Africa History, Bohemican, and the History of Alchemy podcasts. Let's join Travis on location where it all started 500 years ago, Wittenberg, Germany.
All right, so we're here in Wittenberg. I'm right in front of the Luther House. You can hear the people. It is crazy. 500 years. Martin Luther ain't nothing. What am I doing here on this crazy touristy day of the year? Well, Steve sent me here to figure out what exactly happened 500 years ago, what that meant for the Catholic Church during the Reformation. And I'm about to get a private tour, for free by the way, of the Luther House, the exhibit. The exhibit was in the planning and took around 11 years to plan, set up, get everything. There's everything. There's 95 people, 95 objects. Edward Snowden's hard drive, for instance. There's a Steve Jobs MacBook, and of course, papal proclamations and letters back and forth. So I'm here on assignment from the History of the Papacy podcast. Stephen Guerra sent me here. And, let's see what I can dig up for you.
Thus began a long day of recording video and audio for the 500th Reformationstag, as the Germans say, for the 500-year anniversary celebration of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Thesis on the church door in Wittenberg. Wittenberg, and in fact all of Germany, went all out. This is part of a scavenger hunt across the Agora Podcast Network. It was amazing to have a behind-the-scenes glimpse of the exhibit, a private tour, and an apartment right next to the medieval market, and even a parking spot, because one of the curators of this exhibit is also the creator of the Secret Cabinet, der Buddler. Some 200,000 people went to Wittenberg for those days, a town of just a couple thousand normally. Now, let's see how the audio turned out.
We're standing here now at the sculpture of Virtue of Mercy. It's made by a famous sculptor based in Nuremberg, Master Erhard, he was called, and very famous one, and we're very proud that we got that here, because normally that's biggest highlights in other museums. We got it from a private collection, so we were proud to have that here. And it's very nice when you see Mary standing She has baby Jesus on her arms. So far, so normal.
Yeah.
But you see the two angels holding next to her coat open, and you see the blue lining underneath. Blue because that's the color of Mary.
That's her color, yeah.
Why it's blue? Because blue is the most expensive color to produce in those times to show her status.
Yeah.
And you see, which is striking, all the people
in her cloak,
covered by her,
right? Protected,
she protects all mankind. If you look closely, you see on the one hand side all male figures.
Okay.
Beginning from the Pope to the King to the Cardinal, Bishop, the Knight. That's the one with red helmet, probably.
Right.
Even the monk and the lay people.
Farmers.
Every status is there, every rank in society. On the other hand, you see old women, young women, children. You have all ages.
Yeah.
So it means every status, every age is under the protection of Mary.
Yeah.
Everyone,
and
it's all mankind.
Exactly, and just because it's audio, I mean the people are 1/3 or less than half as big as Mary. Mary is this big looming figure, and even the Pope is tiny in compared to the Virgin Mary. Yeah.
Preaching and looking at us, for instance, the King is directly looking at us, the Bishop, to show their piety to the onlooker.
Right. Yeah.
So it's very nice. If you can, it's probably was standing in the middle of the church there to give you hope, to give you hope of mercy.
Yeah, it gives you the idea.
Which comes to you.
Mary's watching out. She's protecting us. Yeah.
And still, the colors are faded, but you can imagine how colorful this might have looked like. Especially the gold, gold of the coat was striking. The blue, which was coming underneath.
The gold and blue together would have been a sight to see. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it is. So.
In my previous visit to Wittenberg some 4 years ago, when I first started to plan this trip, Buddler gave me a tour of the Martin Luther house, and I learned quite a bit about Wittenberg itself. And when I came back for this tour, there was a couple of things that I wanted to pick out, especially for the history of the papacy. And one of those things was, in Wittenberg, there were quite a few relics, and especially one collector who had some 1,900 relics. Each one would have given him an indulgence of 100 years, so he had some 1.9 million years of indulgences. And in the exhibit, they had a relic in its case of supposedly a bone of Saint Damien. And this is something you still commonly see in Europe, is bones of people displayed in churches. But one reason that Martin Luther picked the 31st of October, All Hallows Eve, basically Halloween, the evening before All Saints' Day, wasn't an accident. The reason he picked it was because many people would come into town on All Saints' Day because of the collection of relics that Wittenberg had. In particular, the nobleman that collected this collection in Wittenberg was, one thing that was kind of a thing to do if you were collecting relics, had enough money, then one thing was that there's a name day for every day of the year. There's the name day after the saint of that day, the feast day of that saint. It's still in some calendars in Europe from the early modern period. And one thing to do was to collect a relic of each saint on the calendar. So I have like a piece of St. Nicholas on St. Nicholas's Day, and a piece of Martin for St. Martin's Day. And another one was to have a whole chessboard, a whole chess set out of bones of relics. And if there was enough relics in a town, this would be good for the town itself economically, because it became a pilgrimage site. One of the things in the collection was a pilgrim staff with kind of almost like magical words written on it for good luck. Martin Luther himself did a pilgrimage to Rome, and probably my favorite object in the exhibit was this portable sundial that helped you navigate. So this is a little bit hard to explain on a podcast, but imagine it's kind of as big as a smartphone would be today, maybe a little thicker, but just a handheld device. And on the front of it, just the cover is a map of Europe, turned upside down, so south is up. But from wherever you are, Wittenberg, let's say, near Berlin or Munich or Augsburg or any place in Germany in the Holy Roman Empire, all the way down to Rome, which was still in the Holy Roman Empire. So that's the cover. And then there's little holes in the cover that go all the way through. And if you open it, what it is a collapsible sundial. So on the inside is where you could put the pegs for your, well, you put in a peg, and then depending on the length of the shadow, you could see where you are. And then on the back of the cover, if you put a peg through the map, that would in turn leave a shadow, and you could kind of tell the time, the local time. And then there was a place for an inset compass, so you could have you'd open up this thing, you have a compass, on the outside's a map, and you can kind of at least get your latitude to figure out, if you've reached Austria yet or Italy yet, how far it is to go. And Buddler talked quite a bit about Martin Luther's pilgrimage, and the exhibit had this whole interactive, touchscreen display of a pilgrim's guide to Rome. And one such pilgrim's guide they had there, which was in the time of Martin Luther, something that Martin Luther himself might have possessed on a pilgrimage to Rome, which was the Mirabilia Romae. So like Martin Luther had one in his collection, and they were one of the earlier printed works. So the one they had in the exhibit was printed. The one they had in the exhibit was from 1501. And it's kind of neat. So you have in the exhibit, you had a touchscreen display where once you get to Rome, then there was the different sites that you'd want to go visit. You could get indulgences for having gone to pilgrim site, so time off of purgatory. I'm not exactly 100% theologically sure how that works, but I do know that if you collected relics, you could get 100 years, obviously, like in St. Damian's case in Wittenberg, or by going to visit them, you'd get indulgence and get some time off. This is famously what Martin Luther was against. It didn't make any sense, doing actions to get out of purgatory early card. And there was one indulgence letter in particular that kind of, here's one it's from 1517. I think it was, this is a printed one. So they actually had one on display there where it was kind of misrepresented or misunderstood by Protestants, and the indulgence letter kind of lays out things that could happen. So the Protestants took it as, when Martin Luther railed against them, it was like they're selling indulgences for sins not yet committed, which is not quite what actually happened. That's kind of a misrepresentation, but it is, a very generous indulgence letter. Here's one from 1517 that they had on display. And it might even be this particular letter that they had on display that would be the reason that Martin Luther then kind of, up in a huff, nailed 95 Theses to a door. One of the objects in the exhibit that I found almost most interesting was the papal bull warning Martin Luther. And they had one of a print version from June of 1520. And so this is already not excommunicating him, but kind of the papal bull that was sent around Europe saying Martin Luther's writings were dangerous. This was a papal bull by Leo X. And another thing they had was, I think Buddler said this story in English too, but the liturgy for putting on the papal shoes. Like there's kind of a ritual or a ceremony for putting on the Pope's shoes in the morning, and especially Leo X, who was, he was a Medici, so he was kind of a priest at the age of 7, a cardinal at the age of 14, if I remember correctly, and then a very young pope. So he was, as a Medici, he was into the pomp and circumstance, the ritual of it all, and, kind of the mystical aspects of doing everything the right way, and the kind of a superstitious way of thinking, I guess you could call it. But a really interesting pope at a really interesting time in history when this is the pope that Martin Luther dealt with. What's interesting is that we got to see the shoe ceremony page, but depending on what day you got to the exhibit, it was a different page, because this book is exhibited in New York somewhere, or in a collection in New York, and so they actually had a person from New York come and turn the page every couple of days, so it didn't get too much light on one page. And it was like this beautiful illuminated manuscript that was just a lot of details. It was, illumination on parchment from 1520. So that, while this was all happening, around the other shows that I'm doing for Reformation Day, there's some more relics about that kind of paint a picture of the time when Martin Luther lived, and the church that he himself was a monk of. He was a Catholic monk first and foremost. He didn't want to break with the church. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church. And there was just many examples of this, and how Martin Luther was still kind of a person of his time and didn't, break completely. He was not one of the most radical reformers of the time by any means. And you get a glimpse of that if you listen to some of the other Agora podcasts that I did a special for, just because I don't want to make this one too long. But I also really enjoyed even the modern, so the previous Pope, Ratzinger, who was Benedict the 16th. He had one of his speeches, or they had one of his speeches on display, which was, looked like it was typed out in typewriter with a couple of notes written in there by the Pope himself, and the technical details in German. So I'm a technical writer, so I just loved this. But yeah, his seminar schedule, and it was interesting to see that on the 500 day itself, Angela Merkel was there, the Chancellor of Germany. There was many high upper echelon politicians there, because it is also a German history day, a day in German history that they're celebrating. All of Germany had a national holiday, which normally Martin Luther Day is not, Reformation Day is not. It's just a Protestant, like Northern German holiday. But on this year, ironically, Catholics got a holiday more because it was celebrated nationwide. And it was interesting to see that. So the sermon was a Lutheran, I guess, I don't know, cardinal, preacher, whatever, but a high up somebody high up in the Lutheran church. And there was a cardinal or a bishop, giving a sermon also. So they took turns and did it together, which was very nice. So it was a nice celebration of recognition of the other church, the Lutherans and Catholics, which, on the 500-day celebration was done in a very nice way, I guess is my point. It was trying to be acceptant. The Pope was going to show up, but didn't, because he didn't want to take any attention away from this Protestant holiday, or the Protestants, celebrating Martin Luther, which was just really interesting. Like, there was just a lot of respect between the Lutheran and Catholic churches on this day, and in general today, I guess, anyways.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That's for Steve Guerra's History of the Papacy podcast. And wow, that was really something. I'm going to have to go when I get home to California, talk a little bit more about it and summarize it. But it's hard to digest it all, what I just saw, but it was amazing. Now, if you want to hear more of what happened today, I gave Steve an exclusive, but there's a couple more podcasts out there where you can do that. Take a look at podcastnik.com. There should be, hopefully I'll get something together for an Agora feed, for the Agora feed. So this is a Agora Podcast Network exclusive. And all together, to really see the full picture of this day, you'll have to, and this is my little marketing ploy here, but you'll have to listen to the History of the Papacy, English Renaissance from Heather Tesco, the Cannonball, and History of Germany, obviously, and of course, Ben Jacobs' Wittenberg to Westphalia, Wars of the Reformation. That's right. That's how we network. That's how we do things. So go take a look at all those 5 podcasts all together. I'll do another summary on the Agora feed. And this is a big day. I don't think you want to miss a second of it. There's a lot of surprises.
Now go listen to the other 4 to get the whole picture of the 500-year celebration of Martin Luther's 95 Thesis in Wittenberg. I'm Travis Dow from Podcastnik.com. Thanks.
We are very fortunate today to be joined live in studio, live quote unquote, with Travis Dow, our foreign correspondent. Travis, how are you?
Good. Still a little tired, but I'm doing well. Everything was it was a successful trip.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was a real whirlwind trip too.
Yeah, I joke that I need a vacation after that vacation, but no, it was a lot of fun.
Maybe you can set up a little bit of how you got there, because you really is just about as much of a front row seat as you possibly could have for this monumental event. What was your context in Wittenberg?
Yeah, so that's a fun story, because I was there 4 years ago, almost exactly, and it was right before der Buddler, his real name's Mirko Gutjahr, and right before Mirko, right after he started working on the exhibit, actually. So he was working on it for a good 4.5 years, and I didn't even know he lived in Wittenberg. I thought he lived in Halle, a city in Saxony or Saxon-Anhalt, and because he was a curator for a museum there when he started his podcasts, because he also podcasts. And I went to visit him. I was going to Berlin, and I was like, "Oh, I'm driving by Halle," and he's like, "Oh, I don't live in Halle anymore. I live in Wittenberg." I was like, oh, well, that's close too, isn't it? So I go to Wittenberg, and he gives me a tour of the Martin Luther house. He just walked me right in. We didn't pay anything, and he's just like, oh yeah, I work in the Martin Luther house now, and he showed me Martin Luther's room and graffiti of Peter the Great, and all that stuff. And he hinted that there was an alchemy exhibit happening. Now, Mirko de Buddler he's a trained archaeologist. That's what he studied for. That's what he went to school for. But now he's a historian and a museum curator by career. So he was really excited about an archaeological dig in Wittenberg that was happening, and that was of an alchemical lab. So that was, so we're walking around town. My dad was there, my wife was there, and my dog was there, and he gave us a tour of Martin Luther House and then a tour of Wittenberg itself, and all the history of science stuff around that city. And then I sat him down and was like, okay, but the reason I actually came to visit him was way back when, like episode 7 of History of Germany was the Sky Disk of Nebra, when I was back in the Bronze Age. So we recorded that. I interviewed him for that. And then he mentioned there's some trivia around Martin Luther's 95 Thesis. Like, did he actually nail them onto the church door? Did he even use nails? Did he, was it more than one copy? So we talked about that. So I did talk about Martin Luther some 4 years ago, just as a little trivia bonus episode. And then he mentioned, because he was there for the Martin Luther house. And then he said, well, I'm actually here for this exhibit that's happening in 4 years. And I was like, oh, really? And at that point, I lived in Prague. So it was like a 3-4 hour car ride away. And I was like, well, I'll be back. You can count on it. Unfortunately, the next year I moved to California. And I still decided that, you know what, if I'm going to plan a vacation, I might as well plan it around Halloween 2017 and go to Wittenberg for that. So I did. It was just a lot further trip, and I tagged a lot more stuff onto it. So we recorded for podcasts on haunted castles, and we took a tour of the history of astronomy in Nuremberg, and we took video of the Nazi trial building, and but we got a lot of history of like astronomy and map making and watchmaking and stuff from Nuremberg. And then headed up to Wittenberg, where I recorded basically all day with video cameras and microphones. And I gave a lecture of alchemy in Nuremberg, and then headed up to Berlin. So it did happen. Something that I planned 4 years ago. I made it with pretty good video and audio equipment. So there's a lot there. And I saw Mirko again, and he gave me a 3-hour tour of the exhibit this time, which was in the same building of the Martin Luther house. The Martin Luther house used to be a monastery, and which they then kind of took over. And so now a different part of the monastery they'd fixed up into kind of a museum, and it was amazing. It was, like I described on the scene, it was 95 objects of 95 peoples and stories. So it happened 4 years after kind of sitting around in Wittenberg going, oh yeah, I'll come back someday. I did. I returned, and it was amazing. So still editing the audio and video. Now it's a couple weeks later, but yeah, it was a great trip. All that I hoped it would be.
Who this Martin Luther house that Der Buddler is the curator of, who owns that, or like who controls it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think now it might actually be the state or the city of Wittenberg. So when you get near to Wittenberg, my navigation system didn't just say Wittenberg. It actually said Lutherstadt Wittenberg, Luther City Wittenberg, and even on the Autobahn it says Wittenberg Lutherstadt or Lutherstadt Wittenberg, like Luther City Wittenberg. And so does Worms, and so does where did he grow up? Mansfeld or something. There's a couple of towns that are Luther cities, and that's really, so, having signs that say that on the Autobahn, it really is, it's part of German geography. It's part of German history and culture. So I think it's actually owned by the state, or at least the city, or maybe the county of Brandenburg or wherever it is. Because I don't think it's privately owned. I think it's like one of the national heritage sites, basically.
Then these areas, most of Luther's stomping ground back in 1517 or 1500s, was a part of the GDR, the East Germany. What happened to that area during communism?
Yeah. So I don't want to say they got lucky. But the fact is that Wittenberg is a beautiful, beautiful medieval town. And the reason it's a beautiful, beautiful medieval town is because it had a little bit of money way back when. Even to Luther's time, it wasn't a rich city. It had a monastery, it had a church. There was a university. Like, we keep coming across them in the History of Alchemy for the university in Wittenberg. So there's a lot of scholars, but it was kind of abandoned as far as like a market town. Nuremberg was much bigger and rebuilt over the centuries, and Berlin, obviously, but Wittenberg was a small village. And in the end of the 19th century, there was some money, and then it stopped. So all the buildings are either medieval or kind of this golden age, in the end of the 19th century. And then they didn't have money in the Weimar Republic, and they definitely didn't have money in GDR. In East German times. So it kind of became a time capsule. Bigger towns were bombed in World War II and then rebuilt in kind of East German, concrete and glass styles. And other towns were that were richer in the 17th, 16th centuries. You wouldn't have seen the original stuff from Martin Luther because they would have been demolished and built over. So Wittenberg, I say they got lucky, but the fact is that it's kind of a pristine town because it was poor for a lot of its history, including East Germany. So, and East Germans, I got to say, also recognize the importance of Martin Luther. East Germans also made movies of Martin Luther nailing on the 95 Thesis. So, it's an interesting thing that it's such a German symbol. Prussian symbol, I should say. It's not a Catholic or Bavarian symbol by any means, but it's such a Prussian symbol that even the East Germans didn't dare touch it. That's kind of interesting.
And plus, a couple of circumstances kept it locked up or locked down so that it didn't get bulldozed or bombed over the course of...
Over the centuries, it was just that it was poor. So I say, luckily it was just a poor kind of area. But even the surrounding towns today is far from the richest parts of Germany. So, yeah.
And so you say Wittenberg is, even to this day, it's not a huge town by any stretch of the imagination. What was this like, this 500th anniversary? What did it look like on the street?
Yeah, it was... So Mirko lives right downtown in Old Town. And so you have Martin Luther's house on one side to the left, and to the right you have the Schlosskirche, the castle church, which is where Martin Luther nailed the 95 Thesis on. And I lived right there. So at one point, Mirko actually had to walk the original, which was 500 years old that day. He had to walk the 95 Thesis over to the church castle from Martin Luther's house, meaning exactly 500 years, maybe plus, 6 to 10 hours somewhere in there. He made the same voyage with the same piece of paper that Martin Luther did. So it was right there. And and that little walk is maybe a couple hundred yards. So it's a very small old town. There was a medieval market right outside Buddler's door, and then the main town square with statues of what's his name, Melanchthon or something like that, and Martin Luther, of course, and other great reformers. It was a bigger market square, and then that was just packed full of people. And when I say packed full of people, so the town, not just Old Town is just a couple thousand people, but the whole city of Wittenberg is now maybe 40,000 people. But there was some 220,000 people that went to the exhibit. So it was packed elbow to elbow. And I heard a lot of American and British English and, German from everywhere, and Spanish and even, some Slavic languages and basically tourists from everywhere. Even definitely Spanish and Italian and definitely Catholics that were there as well. But it was just definitely a lot of Americans. I mean, it was, a lot of Lutherans that came back for this special day. But it was a big event. Even if you take the whole religion aside, it was just a big, big historic day. And a lot, Angela Merkel was there, and a lot of people might have just came to see her, or even just to protest her. So it was just a lot going on for a lot of, people had different personal agendas, like why they came there that day. And with, I came there to podcast, but there was 220,000 people either going there to pray or going there just for historic reasons, or just going there for the medieval, the carnival kind of atmosphere that was happening. Because it was a national holiday in Germany. So yeah, it was elbow to elbow. It was gangbusters that day. It was really, last time I was there, it was basically empty. It was beautiful weather. It was, just an abandoned little small town. And then this time it was, even on Buddler Street, there was all the little street cafes, the little shacks and street food and, Saturday market kind of mostly selling kitsch, like Luther stuff. There were so many different kinds of Luther souvenirs. I have Luther socks and a Luther rubber ducky and Luther pasta. So a lot of it was like capitalistic, touristic, a tourist trap, let's say. And then a lot of it was like, selling quotes, selling books, selling theological books and history books and that kind of thing. So there was a blacksmith, there was knights reenacting stuff. So yeah, a lot going on for that day.
So there were a lot of like other events going on too that were a part of it.
Yeah, all related, all celebrating Reformationstag, Reformation's Day, but it was far from a pious event. You did see there was some people, usually Americans actually. You'd see Americans sitting and just reading from the Bible or reading works of Martin Luther and that kind of thing. But they were mostly ignored. It was mostly just people looking to get some Bratwurst and a beer and watching the blacksmith make coins or something like that. So yeah, a good mix of stuff. I mean, it was definitely interesting to see.
Do you have any other anecdotes like that of things you saw or people you talked to?
Yeah, wow. I mean, I did a lot of people watching. It was really interesting to, I'd see someone setting up this really nice tripod and a camera and filming the blacksmith, and then he'd suddenly say something to the blacksmith in English, and I'd realize, oh, he's an American, and then say, oh, where are you from? And the guy answers, oh, I'm from Ohio or something. And it was kind of interesting to see that people did come from everywhere, and that guy had come from some university or something and was just reporting back. I don't remember what, or maybe a very small local newspaper or something. But I don't even know. I mean, there was llamas. There was just so much going on in this. I mean, the whole thing was maybe it was longer than it was wide. It was only like 3-4 blocks, maybe 2-3 blocks wide, and then maybe a kilometer in all, like really all the way from the Luther house all the way to the church, the castle church. So not a big strip of area, but it was all a pedestrian zone. Cars were locked off and just elbow to elbow the whole way. A lot of security. I saw Angela Merkel's cavalcade, if that's what it's called, the car. So she came in by helicopter, but then drove away on cars. And so I saw the security, and I'm filming with my GoPro, and I got a microphone clipped to my collar, and I'm getting weird looks, but it was amazing to see. The security was impressive. Still, probably not nearly as much security as if it was an American event. If President of the United States were showing up, it probably would have been 10 times worse. You could actually get pretty close. Mirko sat 2 rows behind Angela. Mirko sat 2 rows behind Angela Merkel in the church. They had kind of a sermon, which was a mixed Protestant Catholic sermon, which I should mention that I thought that was really interesting. I might have already mentioned that in one of the stand-ups on the scene, but I did think that was, at some point I got tired and took a nap, and I went back to Mirko's place and just laid on the couch for a bit, and I was flipping through the channels, and every channel basically either had a Martin Luther movie, it was the news reporting on Wittenberg, so I would, kind of looking out my window, I'd get the same view as on the TV screen, and at some point they actually, if I was paying attention, I would have seen Mirko. I mean, they showed the sermon, they showed Angela Merkel sitting there, and Buddler was, 2 rows behind her. And I thought it was really cool that they had, I don't know who, one of the highest ranking Lutheran preachers or elders, or I'm not sure how that works in the Lutheran Church. But then they also had a Catholic cardinal or a bishop, and they kind of split the sermon and kind of gave it together, which I just thought was amazing. In fact, the Pope was going to be there. He got an invite and he was going to show up, but then he canceled a couple months ago because he said, you know what? I don't want to take any attention away from this Protestant celebration. So to be perfectly honest with you, I went there. I bought my plane ticket hoping that I was going to see Pope Francis. You know, of all irony of ironies, I'll go to Reformation Day and maybe I'll get a glimpse of the Pope. I saw Benedict, and I saw Benedict twice actually, but I haven't seen the new one. So I was like, yeah, I love Francis actually. So. But part of the reason I love him is because he's like, yeah, you know what? I don't want to detract from this Protestant celebration. So he didn't come out of respect. I mean, how cool is that guy, you know? But yeah, it was, I mean, he was going to go. It wasn't beneath him by any means. This was that kind of day. 500 years of, the beginning of, you know, all these holy wars and 30 years war and just some of the worst things that ever happened to Europe. This is what kicked it off. So just interesting, you know, so much, it's just such a heavy day historically for so many different reasons that, you know, it was just great to kind of see the celebration.
Can you tell us a little bit more? You talked about some of the things that you saw during your clip, actually in Wittenberg. Were there any other things that you saw that really stood out to you, or that were like aha moments or wow moments?
Yeah. So the exhibit itself was amazing. There was something like, it took almost a decade of on paper planning, but then a good 4 years of actually sending curators all over the world. I mean, Mirko was actually a messenger, or kind of a postal worker, in the sense that he would actually go pick up valuable objects. He went to the Vatican Secret Archives looking for certain documents. Some objects came from New York, so Mirko actually went to New York to pick something up. And I believe actually that was in your episode, the liturgy of Leo X, and they had that there, and they actually had a curator from New York coming to turn the pages every couple of days. So just the 95, and then of course, you know, they had Edward Snowden's hard drive, they had a Macintosh. Steve Jobs was one of the 95 people. So it was this amazing thing. From, you start off in the exhibit of looking at Martin Luther's life himself, where he came from. A lot of things came from Martin Luther's parents' household in Mansfeld. So his dad's life, his dad as a coppersmith. Then the fact that he wasn't poor, he wasn't rich. He was, you know, he sometimes, in his own sayings, he would say, "Oh, when I was poor as a church mouse, and, you know, back in my slum days." Well, he was, you know, he was pretty high middle class. His dad was in the merchant class, and, you know, pretty well to do, all things considered. They ate well. They even had some animal bones, you know, excavating, like, look, they ate meat regularly. They were doing okay. Showed some copper slag from his dad's industry, and then even some toys, which I thought was really cool. So you got to see some toys that Martin Luther himself would have played with as a child. And Mirko, now, you know, he's the creator of The Secret Cabinet in German, the original. So he's talked about a lot of these things on his podcast, and he does one podcast on archaeology. So he's brought up Martin Luther's, he did an episode on trash and excavating garbage pits. And then one of the things was, oh yeah, you wouldn't believe what we found in the alleyway, you know, next to Martin Luther's parents' house, like these toys. And so I got to see some of those. Which is really cool. But then also where he grew up and his life as a monk and his own pilgrimage to Rome, which I believe I said on the scene, I saved that for your show. That really blew my mind, the way it was exhibited. So they had a touchscreen device, and they had all the navigation tools they would have actually used to get to Rome, and then some information on what a pilgrimage looks like. So, you know, imagine two Augustinian monks, one walking behind the other. Two, they're both completely quiet, so they're in pairs for security, but they don't talk to each other at all. So, and that's kind of you don't want them to conspiring. You want them just deep contemplating in their own thoughts. And, you don't want them talking to themselves. It's kind of like soldiers in East Germany. They speak different languages, and you wouldn't leave them alone. And you definitely wouldn't leave them by themselves, but you wouldn't leave the two alone either, because they might defect together. That's kind of how a pilgrimage was for monks. So they'd go in pairs, but in silence. And they had navigational tools, they had maps, they had, sundials to figure out where they were, when they were, and what to do, pray at certain times. So it was kind of, it was just really cool to get a glimpse of that. They had, relics. I talked a bit about relics on your show. Why that was so important, and they had these indulgences for visiting relics, for buying relics, for all kinds of things. And so this was the world that Martin Luther grew up in. And then they had things from around the time of his 95 thesis, and then the direct consequences. For Heather Tesco, I told her about a letter that was there from Henry VIII. They had Shakespeare, they had Hamlet references Wittenberg. They had Nietzsche. Nietzsche was saying, well, Goethe, Luther's Bible, and German needs another third great work. Here it is. Thus spoke Zarathustra. And that's Nietzsche's, so even Nietzsche referenced Martin Luther. He hated Luther, but just as saying, well, he is one of the top German figures. The German language was, it's hard to overestimate the way that Shakespeare coined terms. So did Luther. We get a lot of things from his translation of the Bible, but also just him sitting around the table. A lot of he'd always had a student write down things he said. So we have a lot of Luther quotes, and he coined a lot of terms. And in that regard was very important to the German language, just like the Grimm brothers, or just like the St. James Bible in English, or Shakespeare in English. So, of course, Shakespeare was there. There was, many, many different parallels, direct influences. Someone that really went to town with the Finnish language. It turns out he was a Lutheran, and he was inspired by Martin Luther, and then went back to Finland and wrote down the Finnish language. I forget his name. Christina of Sweden sword was there. I'm a big Christina of Sweden nerd, fanboy. We did a show on her on History of Alchemy, and she converted. So her father was basically the hero in the 30 Years' War. If it wasn't for him, Adolphus of Sweden, Europe would have probably been Catholic pretty quick. But he won a decisive battle, and then so how ironic is it that his daughter, who we love because she was an alchemist, also grabbed onto the ritual and the history of the Catholic Church and converted to Catholicism, and ended up moving to, abdicated her crown of Sweden and moved to Rome. It's like, how cool is that story? The daughter of the hero of the 30 Years' War ended up going back to the Catholic Church. So, I saw her sword. I mean, I was just like, but, Mirko was trying to talk about some other things. And I'm like, wait, tell me about the sword. I saw Winnie Two's gun. Winnie Two is a fictional character, a Native American Apache chieftain who was completely wholesale invented by Karl May, a German author who spent some time in jail and wrote these American Westerns, and is probably the most famous author of American Westerns in Germany. I grew up reading Karl May in school, and he'd never been to America. He'd never seen a Native American. It's completely fictional. And yet I saw his rifle. So, I brought him up a bunch of times. I do a show on the U.S. on Americana kind of thing, but only in German. And so I made fun of Karl May. And then, so Mirko wanted to point out his gun to me and like, oh, I saved this just for you, Travis. And so, yeah, I mean, 95 objects. It's hard to pick a favorite. It's hard to, Edward Snowden's motherboard was there, and you could see where the NSA had chiseled out the CPU, like the main processor, with a crowbar. Like there was these heavy marks on this motherboard, and the CPU itself was like smashed. CPU is like the brain of a computer. It was like smashed with a hammer. It was in 3 parts. And, it's just like, well, why is Snowden's motherboard there? And Mirko's like, well, first of all, that was not easy to get, but, sure enough, we got it. Here it is. And second, it's Martin Luther took a stand against censorship. He took a stand for freedom of speech in the sense of, you you just have to kind of, it's a very Jan Hus idea, which is a very John Wycliffe idea. It's just a very much like, I cannot, these are my beliefs, and lying to myself would be the worst sin ever. So I'd rather, you kill me than me going against what I actually feel in my heart. And so just this kind of idea of, I'm not a fan of Edward Snowden or his methods, really, honestly. Like, I don't think he's a saint. But this idea of like, I need to do what I feel is right, even if not everybody agrees with me, or if it's, goes against the majority. Like, yeah, as a born rebel, I appreciate those kind of ideas. So it was cool that they went there in the exhibit. They also had Julius Streicher. Streicher, he came up in Nuremberg again when I was there. He was one of the guys tried at the Nuremberg Nazi trials because he's one of the worst Nazis of all times. And one thing I want to point out is that almost every major Nazi work of literature quoted Martin Luther, and often taken out of context or kind of overemphasized or kind of over-exaggerated, but it is a fact that Martin Luther was an anti-Semite to some degree, and in his earlier works, he really embraces Judaism and Jews as, religions of the book. But in his later years, he really has a bigger and bigger bone to pick. He keeps saying, never actually reach out in violence, never actually, do anything physical. But that part's just dropped by the wayside for the Nazis, and Nazis quote him a lot. And Julius Streicher, for those that don't recognize the name, he was the editor and basically creator of Der Stürmer, the Stormer, which was the Nazi propaganda, especially in the early years. Well, I mean, the whole time, but it was Hitler's first major Nazi publication that became the propaganda and spreading their ideas. The Stormer was a very vicious, dangerous work, like newspaper or magazine kind of thing. And Streicher was there, and it was a children's book that they had on the display. So, don't forget the bad side of Martin Luther. The title was a quote from Martin Luther, and it was, oh, yeah, it's something like you wouldn't trust a fox, or like a fox on an open field, you wouldn't trust a Jew, something. And it's a children's book. So it's all with illustrations and everything, and these horrible caricatures of Jews. And, so that's the worst thing. Or, what happens if you take someone's words and twist them for the purpose of evil. So they also had that in the exhibit. And if they didn't, I would say something was missing, because Martin Luther is not someone you should just put on a pedestal and worship as a saint. His followers did far worse things than he might have done, and they might have taken his words out of context, but still, don't forget, he was not a holy man. He was a fallible human being, and said some things that I personally don't agree with majorly. And this was taken up by the Nazis in a big way. East Germans like Martin Luther. So did the, communists like Martin Luther, let me put it that way, for his work ethic and this and that. Nazis like Martin Luther for his anti-Semitic things, as well as just his Germanness. And Prussians, Bismarck like Martin Luther. So there's a lot of different groups of people that where Martin Luther meant something to them, very importantly. Lutherans in America, they're being Lutheran and being German, to them is the same thing. It's kind of like you can't separate the religion from the culture. Kind of like an atheist Jew or a Catholic that's kind of lapsed over time. It's like, well, they would still identify as Catholic. And, these German Americans that are fourth generation and have no idea, have never picked up a Bible, they would still consider themselves like Lutherans, because that means something culturally that, it might not, other denominations might not have that deep of a meaning. So, oh yeah, I mean, the 95, that's why I split it up into so many parts, was the exhibit itself. Mirko gave me a 3-hour tour, and I felt like, I had to try to keep my mouth shut because there was just so many questions, and, we could have just chatted about this or that for hours and hours. One big focus was the printing press. There was a lot of cool stuff. I saved a lot of that for Heather Tesco's podcast, the English Renaissance podcast, because there was a printed open letter to Henry VIII and then a printed open letter back to, or Martin Luther first, from Henry VIII to Martin Luther, getting advice on divorce, obviously, and then Martin Luther replying, and Henry VIII and Martin Luther did not like each other after that. So that was really interesting, and just some of the very early prints from that time, some of the earliest prints of the 95 Thesis was there, just printed a couple weeks after, right now, like 500 years ago today, basically, some of those prints. And then a letter from October 31st, 1517, basically writing a nobleman or one of his friends saying what he had just done. So, oh, yeah. The relics I talked about on your show, some of the superstition and the pilgrimages, staffs and stuff around it, still with magic words on them. So, you really kind of go from this one world of indulgences and pilgrimages and having people's bones in glass jars to a world of the printing press and wars, not a better world, but a very different world within just a generation or two. And I think the exhibit did a great job doing that. The final piece was even, along with Edward Snowden's hard drive and a Macintosh, they had little clips. They projected a bunch of little clips of the movies throughout the years. And it goes from the silent era movies. Some of the very first German-made silent films are, of course, Martin Luther hammering 95 Thesis on the wall. It was such a cultural icon. To all the way, my German professor was involved in the 2003 Luther production. He was one of the producers, and that was produced in English and German. So it was actually produced bilingually because it was such an important work. They didn't want to synchronize it or dub it. They wanted to do it twice. And East German made Luther films. You bet Nazis did. There's new ones. There's the Luther Matrix, which reminds me of like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. They go off into weird directions, but it's still such a topic. It's just we might not see it so much outside of the German-speaking world, but within Germany, Luther's footprints are felt the way that we feel the St. James Bible or Shakespeare. It's just you just feel the presence. This phrase was invented by Luther, or this term, or this way of thinking, or this cultural phenomenon. It's definitely a part of being German, I would say, whether you're Protestant or not.
Now, as you were saying, you provided pieces for several other podcasts, including the History of the Papacy, which we just heard, the Cannonball podcast, the English Renaissance History podcast, Wittenberg to Westphalia. Also, there'll be some on the Agora feed, as well as your own show, History of Germany, which is in both English and German. And isn't there something else about the history of Germany that you're just starting to share now?
Oh, yeah. So I have the feed approved. So History of Germany in Arabic will exist, which is I'm very excited about. I can't even put it into words, really. I would drop everything to make this happen. And I heard the first prototype of History of Germany in the Arabic language, and it blew my mind. I don't understand Arabic, so I was just very impressed. I hope it was accurate, but yeah, I have a Syrian refugee in Cairo helping me translate the kind of a different version. Won't be 1-to-1, but translating the History of Germany to Arabic. And this was his idea, or friends of him who kind of approached him because he has the skills to do it. He has a great voice and he can translate, and he's tech savvy, so he can edit and everything. But he approached me and he sold the idea to me hey, I want to create this. I want to create an Arabic version to help Syrian refugees in Germany. And I was just like, what? This is, yes, please. How can I be of service? What do you need? So we've been working through it together to try to get everything set up. So it looks like that'll happen very soon. We just now got the RSS feed and everything set up. And I definitely do want to mention it because it might not be findable in iTunes. It's just, it's just Arabic works a little bit different. And we are actually Acasts, our hosters, we're their guinea pig. So they've agreed to this. They're actually very excited about this, but they've agreed to this on a guinea pig term. So I do need to get the word out. Tell everybody that might be interested in an Arabic version. And if you know people that might be able to help, if they're in a refugee organization or something, we're looking for partners and we're looking for ways to spread the word, and we'll then plug those organizations. So we're trying to work with other people helping Syrian refugees, particularly in Germany. But yeah, the idea there is, the way it was pitched to me and the way I was instantly just like, yes, how can I help, was it was pitched to me by I want to help Syrian refugees in Germany kind of get the history of where they are, who they're dealing with, and, if they want to integrate better, but at least, kind of understand, what German culture is and why Germans are the way they are. And I was just like, well, say no more, let's do it. So I'm twisting the focus a little bit, speaking to a little bit different audience, not assuming much ground or basic knowledge, just kind of starting from step one and going through it all. But yeah, very excited about that. That should be coming up soon.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, because it's one of those things that A, would only happen through the internet, and B, there's probably 5 different pieces of the pie that had to come together. And if one of those didn't happen, the whole thing probably wouldn't work. So it's pretty unbelievable that all the stars aligned for it.
Yeah, this is something I never would have dared to dream, because this is of course I want to help refugees in Germany. That's where I grew up, in Germany, and as a foreigner, a lot of my friends were Turks or Yugoslavian refugees, or that's how old I am. But a lot of immigrants that were kind of the lowest rung on the ladder. And, if I could give back to that community, the people that accepted me in my childhood, but that's the thing, is I just would never dare to dream to even make that possible. And this person approached me saying, hey, I'd like to, translate your show into Arabic. And I, just what? And yeah, he sounds amazing. I heard that he can edit. So, I was trying to help him with Audacity, which I don't use Audacity, but I was, trying to do my best. And yeah, it's just really great that that's actually happening. If I wasn't a podcaster, if I didn't pick Germany as a topic, there's so many things that wouldn't have made this possible. But oh yeah, this is the new focus. The new goal is make history of Germany and history of Germany in Arabic happen. So yep, very excited.
You yourself are located in the Bay Area of California, and you have a few live presentations in the works.
It looks like all the ducks are in a row to do the secret cabinet on stage. Yeah, we'll see how that happens. Looks like the venues are there, the content is all there, and I'm working with a local comedian, Otis Gates, who does Heart On Comedy, which is kind of a comedy troupe. They do sketch comedy, and I pitched him the idea of the secret cabinet, and we are kind of like, hey, let's do snake oil salesman, 19th century, go on stage, make it a little bit funnier than the podcast, we'll actually have props, make it kind of gimmicky and this and that. But I got some great ideas on how to combine several episodes into a show. So it'll be unique. There'll be some new content, but people that listen to the podcast will recognize it. So I can't wait for that. That was when I went to Germany and did a live show. I did a stage show of Americana, like Johnny Carson and Don Rickles. I thought, okay, that was kind of my practice. If I can do this in German, then I can definitely do this in English back home. So I can't wait to get that going. It looks like, as early as maybe, I don't know, March or April, we might be on stage. It looks like everything's ready to go. I just gotta rehearse basically and get it done. So yeah, that'll be fun.
That's incredible. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we go?
I think, otherwise, let's see. I'll summarize the whole project on the Agora feed. And then otherwise on the history of Germany, I did interview Der Buddler. I got him. I figured he'd be sick of me after my Wittenberg trip, but no, I interviewed him again, called him up just 2 days ago. And or 3 days ago, and kind of asked him about, so what's next? Is the exhibit's already torn down? It's already in the past. You can no longer see it. And but they're getting ready for the next couple of Martin Luther events in Wittenberg the next couple of years, and the next exhibit will be on heretics, probably, which will be really, really interesting. So yeah, go check out History of Germany for a little bit more of an interview with Mirko himself. And otherwise, go follow the scavenger hunt to the podcasts you mentioned, like the Cannonball and English Renaissance and Wittenberg to Westphalia. Yeah, the Agora feed. I guess we'll summarize the whole thing and make sure people know to come find us. But yeah, wow. I mean, what an adventure. Sleeping on the curator's couch, and probably I'll try to go back to Germany next year just to go visit. But yeah, otherwise, I just need to recover from my trip still, get everything edited and published, and on to the next project.
Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much, Travis, for coming on today.
Sure. Yeah. No, I love talking about it. And I have a feeling that in like 5 or 10 years, I will want to revisit my own scavenger hunt, and I'll have fun listening to all of this, because it really was a memorable trip. And I can already feel myself becoming nostalgic for that crazy day and those crazy couple of weeks of, recording stuff for various podcasts. So yeah, it was a great time.
And I'm sure we'll be hearing you on this podcast soon enough. I mean, it seems like every step of the way that I do something, it's like, oh yeah, I need to talk to Travis about this, or I need to talk to Travis about that. So we'll definitely be hearing from you again.
Yep, I got a couple of, the next couple episodes are written, and the word Pope does come up quite a bit, and I can give you those spoilers. I'm looking at, let's see, where am I? Going all the way, as far as written outlines, I'm getting up into the 12th century already, so we got Crusades, we got Barbarossa, so yeah, definitely, I'll probably be giving you a call here, not too long.
Let's just firstly thank our latest patron at the Antioch level, Thomas. Thank you so much, Thomas. All of your donations and support on Patreon, plus your sending in those reviews on iTunes, are really, really well appreciated. They make doing this podcast so much easier and so much more fun. I would also like to mention the Agora Podcaster of the Month, which this month is the History of Westeros podcast. I still, unfortunately, am not very well versed in those Game of Thrones and Song of Fire and Ice books, but it's a goal of mine for 2018 to become better, and one of the ways that I'll become much more knowledgeable about these great books and television drama is by listening to the History of Westeros. It's just a really well done show, and it really pulls together all the different facts, and it's really well presented. So I highly suggest that if you're really into the Game of Thrones, you should definitely be listening to this podcast, History of Westeros. You can find more information in the show notes. A huge shout out goes to our Rome level patrons, Peter the Great and Mary, our Constantinople level patrons on Patreon, Sandy, Andy, Paul, Dr. Jeff, Robert, Sean, and Yoren, as well as our Alexandria level patrons, Francine and Richard. And speaking of Patreon, one of the new benefits of joining patreon.com/papacy at any level is access to a new series of bonus content called Off-Track Episodes. And these episodes, they really just include little bits of information I've picked up along the way that really don't fit into either of the main episodes or even a sidetrack episode, but they're still fun and interesting. So if you've had enough reason to join patreon.com, here's one other reason to join. And I really sincerely appreciate you taking the time to listen, and thank you again for joining us, Travis. And I look forward to seeing you on our next stop on our trip through the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church.